Hey everybody, Mr. Dowell. This is a video on Module 33, Part 2. We did Part 1 with reasons that we forget. This one's going to focus on things like constructive memory, misinformation effect, source amnesia, kind of where our memory leads us astray. So you might remember from earlier in the course, the first week, we did the memory demonstration, and some of you were able to recall a word that I didn't even say, that word sleep. And so I really like that demonstration because it points out, what's going on that we're going to talk about in this video. So if you see on the slide here, our memories are not a perfect snapshot of what happened. So they're kind of a mix. Like there's some that really did happen, but we are very prone to infusing into our memory biases, information from our schemas, stereotypes, things like when people recall a story, they're more likely to recall, a pilot as a male and a nurse as a female, just because that's what they're used to seeing, even if the opposite was true in those stories. And a lot of this goes back to a classic study by a woman named Elizabeth Loftus. Her name is on the slide there, where she had video footage of cars driving, and then they would crash into each other. And so in the control group, they had people watching the video, and then they asked people about how fast do you think the cars were going when they hit each other. So that was the control group. And then in the experimental group, same video, but they just phrased the question. They said about how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other. And so the mere changing of the phrasing of the question actually led respondents to increase their estimation. And these questions were asked, I think 15 or 20 minutes later, but it increased their estimation of how fast those cars were going. So again, you can really alter people's memory based on how you ask questions. So if you ever watch a lot of, legal shows and you're like, objection, Your Honor, leading the witness, that's a real thing. Like you can lead people to have different recollections and those kind of things based on the way questions are asked. And so this is called the misinformation effect. We're incorporating misleading information into one's memory. So there's a lot of ways that this can occur, and later you're going to watch a video about the story of Ronald Cotton and how he was incarcerated for a rape that he did not commit. And it's going to talk about the misinformation effect. They actually have Elizabeth Loftus in the video, so you're going to see some concrete examples of that when you do that assignment. Another example of where memory can lead us astray, it's called source amnesia. So this is one of those psych terms that you can really break down and use those context clues. So amnesia means to forget, and source, where does it come from? So you forget where a memory comes from. So there's several examples of this. One would be, if you meet somebody or you see somebody somewhere and you're like, I know you, but I don't know where I know you. And I feel like this happens to me all the time. Maybe it's a thing where they're former students or something like that. And I'm like, I know you, but when did I see you? Another favorite one is if you're telling someone a story, you're like, oh, hey, dude, remember the time, blah, 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 blah. And they're like, yeah, dude, I'm the one that told you that story. Or, yeah, I was there. So you had source amnesia because you don't remember where you heard it from. Great story about the late Ronald Reagan, former U.S. president. He was giving a speech, and I think it was maybe Veterans Day or Memorial Day, one of those two. And he was telling this story from World War II about this courageous pilot who their plane had taken fire from the enemy, and it was going down, and he saved the person that he was riding with, his co-pilot. But it turns out the story never happened. It was actually, he was depicting a movie. So he thought that he was telling this story of what happened in World War II, but he was actually recalling a scene from a movie from like the 1950s. This can sometimes have dire effects too. Source amnesia, there's one example of, there was a news anchor that was briefly arrested for a sexual assault. He was later exonerated, but what had happened is the woman who had been assaulted, while she was being assaulted, she looked over and the television was on and she saw the newscaster's face. And so when she went to report it, she looked at the lineup, she attributed the newscaster's face to her assaulter, and that led to some interesting outcomes. But for the guy, he had an alibi. He was like, well, I was on TV at that very moment. But again, source amnesia can really it can mess with our memory. Children's eyewitness recall. There's a big, long diatribe in the book that talks about this. It's really interesting. So I would encourage you to look at it. There's not a lot of like terminology or very specific things you need to pull away from it, but it just kind of makes some arguments that I can kind of sum up in a minute or two. And basically what they're saying is children's memories are highly suggestible. You can ask questions a certain way, phrase things a certain way, and alter a kid's memory. And they give some examples of this about, they asked, a young child, 3, 4, 5-year-old, where did the person touch you? And they point to the doll, but they can, if they change the way that they word it ever so slightly, they can actually alter the memory of that kid. Even professional psychologists are not able to reliably tell true from false memories. And the older the child, the more reliable the reports, but young kids especially. I'll come home and ask my son like, hey, what'd you do today? And he'll be telling me what he did, but it's like that's not what he did. He's like telling me an episode of Thomas the Train or something. So it's very easy for kids to be, their memories to be altered, and they think things happened and they really didn't. And so the reading goes into a lot of depth talking about that. So what can you do? If you're going to ask children questions about trying to recall things, especially if it's for trying to solve a crime or something like that, really try to use very neutral words. Instead of like, when the person touched you or whatever, ask, did the person touch you? Don't suggest that something happened because it may or may not have happened. So use neutral words, words that the kid understands. So make sure you phrase it, in that manner. But again, the reading just kind of goes into this long discussion about all this. They talk about some of the concerns with memories that get recovered, later on when someone's an adult and they're like, oh, now I remember being abused and those kind of things, and using hypnosis. Very controversial stuff. It's hard to tell someone who feels like they've been abused that like, oh, yeah, you're just making it up. But we do have to acknowledge that sometimes these memories get constructed and they're not real. And it's not the person maybe trying maliciously to hurt another person. They might actually believe that they were abused, but it's a faulty memory. There's misinformation going on there. So you can kind of look at the slide and, these things happen. So it's a controversial thing. We want to be respectful of those people, but also understand that these memories that are being pulled up via hypnosis and from early childhood when these people are adults are very prone to error. So just some things to think about. So interesting stuff. Check it out. And if you have questions, please bring those to class, and be sure to watch the videos about Ronald Cotton and do the reflection with that. So, all right, guys, thanks.